Taupo beef farmers Mike and Sharon Barton have spent some years now coming to terms with farming within nitrogen limits. Mike has an MBA and his studies for that degree included a research project on the implications of a nitrogen cap on farm businesses in the Taupo catchment.
The farm's 142 hectares. Beef and lamb would call it class 4 finishing land, largely flat or rolling, pumice country. The soil type is predominantly Taupo loam. We intend to finish 300 prime cattle a year on the 120 hectares, so you'd have to call it a fairly intensive beef finishing operation. From roughly the beginning of this year, every farm in the catchment requires a consent to farm. They are required to have established a nitrogen discharge allowance, which is essentially a right to discharge a certain amount of nitrogen into groundwater and thence the lake. And we have to provide a nitrogen management plan to the regional council which determines exactly how we're going to farm. It covers things like stocking rate, fertiliser application and the like. Essentially though, this is a problem generated by livestock. It's not a fertiliser issue, it's a livestock urine issue. So if you're going to cap livestock urine as the primary problem, you are essentially capping livestock numbers. If you do a cold hard analysis of farming and look back from 1984 when subsidies were removed through to now, we're receiving in real terms far less for our product, be that meat, wool or dairy products, than we were in 1984. Our response to that declining real income but rising costs has been to intensify. And farmers have got really good at increasing their stocking rate. Once you put emissions cap into the equation, you deny farmers that business model. So I can no longer intensify here under prevailing science, and maybe there will be some incremental gains in the future, but as it stands at the moment, there's not a lot I can do to intensify without increasing my nitrogen discharge into the lake. So to put it bluntly, I can't grow any more meat per hectare, yet my costs will continue to rise, so I have to look at getting more value for a static amount of meat. What we've had to do in this catchment is remove 20% of the manageable nitrogen that's flowing from farmland into the lake, and that's involved a fund set up by the Lake Taupo Protection Trust to buy out farmers or to buy production off farmers. So we need to reduce the amount of nitrogen by 20%. That will affect roughly 30% of the farmland in the catchment. And a large number of farms have been sold, and those farms have been converted into pine trees. My advice to both regional authorities and to farmers, based on the 12 years that it took us to get to this point, is interrogate the science first. Get everyone, that's legislators and farmers, to thoroughly understand the science and agree on the problem. Don't start talking about the solution until you've got bedded down absolute agreement on what the problem is and what the cause of that problem is. If you don't get people, particularly farmers, to accept their role in the problem, you'll never get them on board for the solution. For the last 5 years, AgResearch have had probably the largest farm-scale trial that they've ever conducted in the country, operating over 15 hectares here on the farm. And that trial is now complete. The research is about to be written up, and then behind us here is a permanent research facility established by Landcare. They're very large, deep lysimeters measuring the impact initially of lucerne, and then the facility is available for the next 25 years for any other research that we see as valid. The science to date leads me to believe that there won't be many silver bullets in this issue. We're not going to get some magic bit of research that will tell me that I can carry on farming as I always did and my footprint won't increase. So no silver bullet. The best I can hope for is the odd bit of silver buckshot, so that now and then there'll be incremental gains that I can get from science. There is evidence out there that DCDs do work, and we've trialled them here by actually drenching the animal so that it comes out with the urine, rather than the broadcast model which is used elsewhere in the country. One of the things that the science showed here was that when you regrass, you actually leach a lot of nitrogen. We put high sugar grasses in as one of the trials here, and just spraying with glyphosate and then cross-lot drilling in seed, that year we leached 61 kilograms of nitrogen from the mineralised grass that was killed. If you're going to cultivate and then crop and then strip graze over a period, over the whole winter, you can expect even greater losses. So I suspect over time the issue of cultivating and regrassing will be another issue that farmers have to confront. The system of buying in weaners and finishing them at 22 to 24 months is viable. Over the long term, as our costs continue to rise and as we can no longer continue to increase our stocking rate, that becomes a less viable business model. So we have to start looking at growing the value of a static amount of meat that we can produce per hectare rather than growing more meat. And that led us naturally into looking at some of the other things we've explored, Taupo beef, and seeing whether we can extract an increased value for beef that's grown in a way that protects the lake.
Well, Taupo beef originated after the legislation came in here. We decided we needed to look for a way forward, and we decided to brand the beef from our farm. We wanted to see whether or not, if we were doing the right thing for society, for looking after the lake, whether that meant anything to consumers. So we approached a few restaurants here in Taupo and asked them whether they were interested in doing a trial. Before we could do that, we talked the council into creating an environmental tick, because we now have to do constant auditing, if you like, because we have to stay within a nitrogen discharge allowance. So we thought, if we're doing all this paperwork for them, can we get that to work for us? So they created an environmental tick to say that we were looking after the lake, that our farming practice was good, and then we organised a processor to just give traceability back to our farm.
I think she was talking about the November the 5th, wasn't it?
The restaurants we approached were keen to trial it. We asked them to charge more for our beef than what they had on the menu from the other meat that was on there. At the Hilton, they were using an Angus pure eye fillet, and we asked them to use our Taupo beef eye fillet and charge more for it and give the customer a choice. Within 6 weeks, we found we were outselling 4 to 1, and people were showing that they were happy to pay for it.
This program was made with funding from New Zealand On Air.